From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this final October weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what we have in store for you. Cattle prices push full steam ahead.
There's no major imbalances.
That's as demand heats up during the holiday season. Tensions around trade grow as the fate of NAFTA is unknown.
We have to start looking at the possibility of importing from South America in case the agreement falls apart.
Could the U.S. lose its competitive edge in Mexico? That's our Farm Journal report. One California dairyman has seen the peaks and the valleys.
I'm be 80 years old here in a couple of months. So anyway, so like everybody says, why do you do it? And I said, well, that's been my life and I don't know how to slow down.
Meet our real faces of dairy. And in John's world,
almost done, and there was a surprise.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Chevy Silverado. High-strength steel for high-strength dependability.
Now for the market-related news, the momentum is picking up in the livestock markets. Cattle and feeder futures on fire, making new contract highs this week, with some analysts thinking there's still plenty of freeway ahead for higher prices. And it's that momentum carrying agriculture's balance sheet right now. USDA says the total herd in feedlots hit 10.8 million head, 5% above last year's levels. Placements came in at just over 2 million head. That's 13% higher than a year ago and a level not seen since 2011. While the last cattle on feed report triggered bearish price action, the market didn't seem fazed by the large numbers this month.
What's different about this report is, yes, we've increased placements. The placement number was drastically above 5 to almost 6% above the average trade guess. What was slightly different here is the range of trade guesses was dramatically wide as well, and we were still within the range of trade estimates. And then you got to take a step back and also look at, show lists are down, carcass weights are starting to fall, box beef over $200. We've got great demand. And even if we go back and look at large placement numbers, from a kill standpoint, we're outpacing these large placement numbers. So we've got a lot of strength in it, and these numbers still do matter. The bottom line is we've got demand that's keeping up with the market quite well.
And cold storage numbers out this week showing a record amount of total red meat and poultry in storage. The report showed total red meat supplies down 5% from last year, but supplies are 4% above last month. And looking just at beef, those supplies down 6% from last year, but up 2% from last month. But better demand is helping eat through the amount of red meat in freezers compared to a year ago.
There's no major imbalances. We know we've got some supply challenges going forward, but demand has been very good, and as long as that holds true, then the rest of the stuff works pretty well.
USDA also releasing its September milk production report, production climbing just 1% higher. That's the smallest increase of the year. Cow numbers dipping slightly in September, but remain above 9.4 million head. The Golden State of California once again reporting a drop in production, down nearly 3.5% on a declining cow herd. Wisconsin, New York, and Idaho were all about even with last year, but Texas production jumping again, up 10% over a year ago. Despite some headway during harvest, there are still some major delays. At 70% complete, soybean harvest is 3 points behind average, but it's not as bad as last week's 11-point gap. Farmers in Illinois and Indiana pushed ahead of average, but the Western Corn Belt is still struggling with 20-point delays in Iowa, 16 points in Nebraska, 10 points behind in Minnesota. But the gap is even worse in corn and growing wider. Crop progress report showing overall corn harvest is 21 points behind the average pace. That's 2 points worse than last week. Minnesota is now 41 points behind the usual pace. Iowa and South Dakota are 32 points behind, and Nebraska and North Dakota are 26 points behind. And farmers in the Eastern Corn Belt did make up some delays from last week, but are still running behind.
Agriculture's national forecast is brought to you by Ilevo seed treatment from Bayer.
All right, those are the headlines. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman joins us now with weather. Mike, there are really some major delays. We're falling behind in harvest, including in that northern corn belt.
I know, Tyne, that's unfortunate. Hopefully we can see things dry out slowly as we head through this coming week in most of those areas. It is dry overall in the long-term drought monitor, and it's drying in parts of Arkansas and southern Missouri. That's the area that's been expanding over the past couple of weeks, and you can see expansion in the Northeast as well. This has actually gotten slightly better in the Dakotas and Montana. Not by a lot, though, but you can see a month ago it was a little bit more on the extreme exceptional drought areas, and you can see the drought conditions across the plain states have actually shifted southward a little bit. Now let's take a look at this week. We have a weak system moving through the Upper Great Lakes as we start the week on Monday with just a few rain and snow showers with that one. This is another shot of colder air. But the chilly air has already gone all the way down through Florida, although with sunshine, it's not too bad down there. Pretty intense system, though, on Monday, expected in the Northeast with some good rains, maybe even some strong winds with that one. Most of the rest of the country, though, kind of tranquil. You can see on Wednesday, then, a system coming up out of the southwest will be moving on up into the eastern Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes. Mainly rain, a little bit of snow on the northern fringes, and scattered showers down along the cold front. Another system kind of moving quickly through the upper Midwest with some rain and snow across that area. By Friday then, you can see that first system kind of moving away, but as we look back to the west, a pretty strong system coming into the Pacific Northwest, spreading some snow into the northern plains as well. We'll be back in our next half hour with a longer range outlook.
Thanks, Mike. Well, livestock markets seeing life this week while grains stayed pretty stagnant. But could the harvest low in corn come late this year due to those harvest delays? Chip Nedlinger and Jim McCormick join me next. Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Chip Nedlinger, Jim McCormick on the roundtables with me this week. All right, there wasn't much in soybeans and corn to talk about, so let's start off with livestock. Strong trade in the cattle complex this week. You know, we had the cattle on feed report, we had cold storage report, we have a growing cattle herd. So what is driving this price momentum right now, Chip?
Well, I think a couple things. If you look at the weekly export sales, there's some volatility week to week in those, but we had a really strong week of both beef and pork export sales. And I think domestically, you know, there's lots of indications the economy is starting to grow a little bit. So I think domestic demand's pretty good. Even though we're faced with higher numbers of cattle and hogs, packers are kind of getting the product cleared and making money, and that's given us a nice boost here going into the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and I kind of heard it put as there's no major imbalances right now when you look at this cattle market.
Right. The cattle on feed report from a week ago, though, we do have a lot of numbers out in front of us, so we got some challenges, you know, coming this summer and into next fall. But at least for the next 60, 90 days, we should be, like you said, I think that's a good word, kind of in balance here. Sure, we could probably back off a little bit, but I think we're in a good value area here, both hogs and cattle. Winter and spring, you're thinking favorable prices? Winter and spring. With that being said, I don't want to give the impression that we're just going to go straight up. I think producers out there need to take a look at those winter, you know, February, April contracts in both cattle and hogs. There's good profitability there, and I think you need to realize that and be ready to lock those profit margins in. You know, when we look at the demand side, exports have been strong, and we look at domestic demand, that's been strong. But when you look at this economy, do you think that domestic demand can keep up? Do you think that the economy continues to grow?
At this point, yeah, it looks like it. The GDP came out today at 3%, so it's growing. It's one of the stronger GDP reports we've had. It looks like these tax cuts are going to get through. The Republicans really want to push it through. If they can do that, that should just help keep this economy growing, at least temporarily near term, and that should keep the demand strong on the domestic side. So you think it helps support the economy overall, looking at the stock market and everything? You think right now there's only favorable signs? Right now I think there's favorable signs for the economy. I am a little bit leery. I mean, if you look at this stock market rally as a whole, I mean, we're on, what, year 9 on it. So we're on one of the longest bull runs we've ever had. We're probably a little bit overbought. I think the one thing I'm a little bit leery about tying on the stock market is we've run up a lot of, what's the headline? Tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. If we get that tax cut, have we set ourselves up for at least a nasty kind of buy the rumor, sell the fact? And we could see a little bit of a correction down the line in the stock market, I believe. But how would that impact us in agriculture? Well, I think one way it could impact in a positive way. If, like Jim said, we've had a huge bull run here. So lots of money pouring into the stock market, lots of money made. If you've had money in the stock market for the last 5, 10 years, you've made a lot of profits. These hedge funds have some profits as well. So if we could get a bigger correction in the stock market, I think that just from a diversification standpoint, you'd have some money flowing out of stocks into commodities just from a value play. Well, what's cheap right now? Corn, beans, you know, you can argue. Wheat's cheap.
Some of the soft commodities, coffee, sugar, cocoa, pretty cheap. So I think if you did see a bigger break in the stock market, it could actually benefit the ag side by some money flowing into commodities.
But how long would that take?
Well, that could take, relatively quicker than people think. I mean, the market's going to try to move where it can make the most money. And like Chip said, there's a lot of money being made in the stock market. If you could get the stock market to go into another gear and push it higher, the other thing I'm looking at is inflation. The inflation starts to heat up a little bit. Where's the money going to go? Look at crude oil. Crude oil's already in the mid-50s. It's rallying. The funds are plowing into crude oil. Part of the livestock run, I believe, is the funds. They're just pouring money into both the hogs and the cattle. That could partly be just a demand play. That could essentially be a long-term inflation play, but the grains are cheap. So if you can get an inflation play to jump into it, that can push it. You throw in a weather problem, and all of a sudden you might get a run quicker than people expect.
And with this cattle, you talked about volatility. Do you think this volatility goes anywhere? I mean, we're looking at favorable prices, but we see the peaks, we see the valleys. What will it take to get rid of some of this volatility and these price swings that we see?
Well, I hope we don't. I really don't. I mean, it's kind of a roller coaster ride at times. But I've kind of been pretty vocal all along, even when cattle were at the highs and corn and beans are flying around in big daily ranges. You need that volatility because what that does is it gives you room to maneuver and make plans ahead. And if you had sales made at higher levels, get some calls bought on the break. So I hope we get some more volatility, to be honest with you. Corn and beans really need some because they're pretty dead in the water right now.
Volatility creates opportunity. That volatility we've really not seen in some of these commodity markets like corn and soybeans. So when we come back looking short term, we keep talking about this harvest low, yet harvest is late. So have we put in a harvest low when it comes to a commodity like corn? We'll have them answer that when we come back on U.S. Farm Report.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by the Enlist Weed Control System. More weed control, less drift and volatility, maximum yield potential.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Okay, we were chatting real quick before the break, and when we were talking about inflation, we were talking about, the fundamentals really haven't changed within looking at corn and soybeans. Does it have to be the fundamentals that move corn and soybean prices higher, or could it be something else that comes in and spurs that?
Yeah, I think it could definitely be something like that. Jim mentioned inflation, and you mentioned volatility. I hope we get a little bit of uptick in inflation. Maybe not from my pocketbook, but that will, I think, help the grain markets and some of our agricultural markets go higher. I think hogs is a great example of that right now. Bearish hogs and pigs report. Yeah. We've been building numbers for going on 3 years, and yet we're in the midst of a pretty good rally in hogs. So, there's no doubt it's kind of an old story. We've got plenty of stocks. The corn crop is big. The bean crop's big. But I think if there is some inflationary pressures and or combination of some money flowing out of the stock market into commodities, it could really take people by surprise and cause a rally when no one really expects it fundamentally.
But today, looking fundamentally, looking at the big stocks number that we have, looking at harvest going on right now, since harvest is later, do you think we potentially put this harvest low in the corn market later than normal?
I think right now we got one more shot. We could get one more dip down on the corn market. When? I don't think it's going to, on this November crop report primarily. Okay. Big crops get bigger. I think in general these yields have hung in there so far. So the trade will be anticipating a big at least a small uptick in the crop size. If they do, we might get one little fresh move down. The funds are short around 170, 180,000 contracts. They can add another 40,000 to max out. So they could try to push it one last time, kind of get one last bearish hurrah in. But I don't anticipate it to last. So it's one of those report days where I think they'd buy a bearish report, actually.
Okay, but on the flip side of that, what do you think leading into this November report? What do you think happens with soy? Do you think that maybe we see a little, USDA trim a little bit of this national yield off?
I think you could. And I agree with Jim. I was wrong earlier on corn yields, okay? So
and you admitted it.
I'm kind of cautious to say this. But yeah, corn yields, the later planted corn really hung in a lot better than I expected. Yeah. But as we're talking to producers that got into the last part of their beans and have finished beans up, those later beans, especially in Illinois and Indiana, kind of tailed off. And so I do think there's probably room that the USDA could cut bean yields a little bit. I'm not talking 3 bushels, but a half bushel to a bushel. And we're so tight already on the stocks to use with massive demand that could really be a nice wind at our back type issue for the bean market. And I think that we kind of need to hope for that, because I think that's a lot of what could help drag corn out of these lows as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're months away from planting, but we know a lot of these farmers right now are making decisions on what they're going to plant next year as they look at yields and things like that. So do you think soybeans, ultimately, if we see a little bit of a rally, do you think that buys acres? And then what kind of a scenario does that put into play for next year?
I think if it will buy acres right now. I mean, I know I was kind of surprised this year. I remember about a year ago, I kept thinking we were going to plant more beans and corn.
Right.
I really thought this might be the year we did it because fiscally the farmer has been very tight. I think he's even in a worse situation this year because we never got the price rally they really wanted. We never got over the 420 to the 450 zone. So I think the producer is really fiscally tight. If we can get a bean rally, get these beans back over 10, 10.25, pull the new crop, November 18 over 10, I think you will buy more bean acres.
Real quick, you agree?
I agree. 6 months ago, I thought maybe with the rotation, we'd plant way more corn acres. I don't think so now for exactly what Jim said. Banker was already involved last spring. I think he's going to be more involved this spring, and that could force some additional bean acres too.
All right, we need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to get both of their closing thoughts, so don't go anywhere.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Corvus Pre-Emergence Corn Herbicide from Bayer, the only herbicide to offer 3 levels of defense against weeds, burn down, residual, and activation with rain.
All right, welcome back. Time now for closing thoughts. Chip, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I would say that it's been a long, drawn-out downtrend in corn, but I think we're getting close. Not the time to throw in the towel. On-farm stored corn, there's great carry in the market, a minimal 15 to 20 cent post-harvest bounce. I think if you can store corn on farm, you're going to be able to average 380 or north, and pay for that storage. The bean market, I think, could have some upside into winter, especially with the flare-up in South America. But we got to have our finger on the trigger from the 18 perspective, corn and beans both. Make the plans now and be ready to trip the trigger on that rally.
All right, Jim.
For corn, for me, I'm friendly corn in the long run in the fact that we're trading about the same carryout we had a year ago. A year ago, corn didn't manage to get back up toward $4 by the time in the springtime. So be patient. Like Chip said, use the storage when you get near 4, move it, use options to re-own it, plain and simple.
All right, thank you both for being here. We appreciate it. Well, what caused these impressive yields this year? John gives his thoughts next. Well, we've heard of some monstrous yields out there this year. A pleasant surprise to many of you driving the combine, watching those yields roll in. So what's the culprit behind a surprising crop? Here's John Phipps.
Okay, we have just a few acres of corn left, but we need rain so badly. I'm not upset about the current interruption. To my considerable surprise, our corn crop was not nearly so bad as we expected. In fact, thanks to yield maps, we now know that some parts of the field were phenomenally good. To be sure, lighter soil and higher ground was poor, but the overall average was good news. Nor are we alone, as I can tell from our tight-lipped neighbors. Now, I'll let the NASS bashers respond in their own time, but the idea that yields were wildly overestimated seems doubtful now. I also expect seed companies to begin claiming credit for these surprisingly good yields. It just has to be superior breeding and traits that are making corn so resilient under adverse conditions. But color me skeptical. The biggest proportional yield surprise for us was a decades-old non-GMO hybrid that we grow under contract for the starch in it. Some customer wanted the exact same product they used back several years ago, so our ancient hybrid was dug out of storage and plugged into the ground. Its performance bordered on unbelievable. When you think about it, we really don't have any test plot, or field data comparing really old numbers to the latest and hottest hybrids. We just compare the last few years' offerings with each other. While we've all gone along with the story that all that research just has to be making corn hybrids better, how could we really tell? All I know for sure is I hope that starch customer wants to stick with a hybrid that time forgot. It is also personally reassuring to think that much older competitors can still win a few if we just let them stick around. Finally, if you're wondering what's up with the flower, it is a mandevilla, and Jan is very proud of it, and she thought it would make a good backdrop for a commentary. Also, some fresh homemade brownies were involved.
Thanks, John. Still to come, as trade tensions rise, could it cost U.S. ag its competitive edge? That's our Farm Journal report after the break.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast. From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this final October weekend. Well, eyes are on Washington as the debate over ag labor heats up. Trade tensions tighten as NAFTA negotiations take a pause. It's a dairy farmer surviving the headwinds in California, and there are real faces of dairy. Plus, John has his final chapter of no-till and customer support. Now for the headlines, a bill that would do away with the current H-2A program made it out of committee this week, but it wasn't a smooth ride. And as debate heated up, the measure just narrowly passing with a vote of 17 to 16. House Judiciary Committee Chair Bob Goodlatte, a Republican from Virginia, authored the bill. It's known as the Ag Act, and Goodlatte says it assures a reliable workforce by creating a market-driven and adaptable worker program. Now, the proposal would replace the current H-2A program as well as lower what he called unrealistic wages. It also does away with mandatory housing and transportation for guest workers. But it's a change that John Conyers, a Democrat from Michigan, as well as the United Farm Workers, strongly opposed. Conyers called it flawed legislation. Now, while groups like the Western Growers Association say the bill could be fine-tuned, including allowing legal status for some ag workers, they say the current H-2A system simply doesn't work for them.
Do you think the H-2A program is broken?
Has been since it was enacted. To require the housing instead of a housing allowance has always been a problem. To require this adverse effect wage rate has always been a problem. They say, well, we want to protect American workers. Okay, we don't have many American workers to protect, and we pay a high wage. We don't pay minimum wage.
NASF says finding ag labor is becoming even more complex as Mexico has even started to import workers. Tax reform legislation could be on the fast track. That's as the House of Representatives narrowly passed a budget resolution this week. Tied to that was tax reform. The vote was 216 to 221. A major sticking point within the bill was to eliminate the state and local tax deductions, but the passed plan does eliminate the estate tax, also known as the death tax. Well, Monsanto is striking back at the state of Arkansas for banning its version of dicamba. The company filed suit against the Arkansas Plant Board of the seed and chem makers, asking a judge to block the state agency from enforcing a rule that bans the use of dicamba from April 15th through September 15th next year. The state implemented the ban in response to farmer complaints in September. The plant board rejected a petition from Monsanto to allow its herbicide to be used. Now, meanwhile, an article from Reuters this week suggests the damage from Arkansas this year may be from illegal spraying generic or off-label dicamba. BASF's new formulation of dicamba, Ingenia, was approved for use this year, but the company said it only sold product to cover 52% of the acres planted with dicamba-tolerant crops.
Agriculture's national forecast is brought to you by Kawasaki and the new Mule Pro FXR side-by-side. Ride like a boss with high-end styling and rugged capability.
That's it for the news. Meteorologist Mike Hoffman joins us now with his national forecast, even with a longer range look. Mike, is La Nina starting to show up on your radar?
Ty, that's right. La Nina is probably the biggest factor as we head into this winter, and I think part of the reason we've seen a little bit of a shift in the weather pattern as we have moved through the last week. So let's check the jet stream as we look at things. We continue to see the trough in the eastern part of the country. You will notice, though, that after Wednesday, it starts to flatten out a little bit, and that's going to be the case at times really through the winter. I think the trough will be mainly in the east, A little bit of a ridge out west, but at times it'll go mainly from west to east, and that's going to be the case as we head into the early part of next week, it looks like, with a big storm coming in out west as well. 30-day outlook for temperatures, we're looking at below normal over the central and northern plain states, above normal then for the northeast into eastern Canada, near normal for the rest of the country there, above normal out west. Precipitation over the next 30 days above normal for the southeast and mid-Atlantic, below normal from Kansas to Texas, back into the southwest with a small above normal area up there over Montana. Tyne?
Thanks, Mike. Well, the most recent round of NAFTA negotiations ended in a flurry of terse words and strong statements. Of course, that has the U.S. ag industry on edge, worried about doing long-term harm to relationships with two of our biggest customers. Clinton Griffiths recently traveled to Mexico as a guest of the U.S. Grains Council to see how grain importers are already looking south for supplies.
Engineered several miles from shore in the blue waters of the Gulf sits the port of Progreso on Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula.
Here we're bringing in about 2.1 million metric tons of grains and oilseeds every year.
Less than 2 days from the port of New Orleans, Progreso is a major hub and entry point for U.S. grains.
It's been one of the most important reasons why the United States has been the closest trading partner with Mexico in recent years.
Currently, this facility handles about 7 ships a month, and one of its key strategic benefits is this storage. And in fact, they're adding capacity here as we speak.
We have around 120,000 metric tons of storage available, so it allows for a continuous discharge without any stops.
Seems like a very efficient setup.
It's actually one of the most efficient ports in all of Latin America and is the most efficient port in Mexico.
And Mexico continues to invest here.
We see the government of Mexico making a continuous investment to expand the scope and size of their ports, which will continue to lower transportation costs.
Work being done here and elsewhere.
Currently in Veracruz, they're doubling the capacity of their agricultural receiving ability.
Now we have a facility that we are building there, and it will be ready by the end of 2018.
Importers like Gramosa aren't waiting for port work or NAFTA negotiations to be done before booking ships from other destinations.
Right now, we've been pushed to import from other origins. Right now, we have several suppliers, not only United States.
According to the U.S. Grains Council in September, Mexico took shipment of 4 vessels from South America, 3 from Brazil and 1 from Argentina, including 1 to Veracruz and 1 here to Progreso.
This year we've seen more interest from Brazil. They've been making significant investments in the port of Barcarena and the port of Itaqui. And with these facilities, they're also able to competitively reach the east coast of Mexico with yellow corn and soybeans.
These northern ports in Brazil are helping farmers get grain to end users more quickly, shaving up to 5 days off the shipping time compared to southern ports.
We had never previously really contemplated using South America as a continuous source. We've only ever purchased infrequently, and it was always a matter of pricing.
These gentlemen have been buying grain from the U.S. for some 30 years.
We realize that we depend on grain from the United States, but we have to start looking at the possibility of importing from South America in case the agreement falls apart.
We have done it before because we have taken the advantage of a good price. But I insist, our natural market is 40 hours away from us.
U.S. farmer customers, now reluctant buyers of South American grain, as trade uncertainty clouds the opportunities of the future.
It is a relationship between these buyers and sellers. And I think that's important.
For U.S. Farm Report, I'm Clinton Griffiths.
Thanks, Clinton. U.S. Grains shows total export bookings to Mexico as of mid-October were up nearly 10%. Analysts say the increase may be due to wider than normal basis, but it may also be that Mexico importers are moving grain now ahead of any potential breakdowns in NAFTA talks. The next round is set for Mexico in mid-November. All right, next up, John Phipps.
No-till responses, the final word.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by John Deere. Where can you find the most comprehensive inventory of John Deere certified pre-owned tractors, combines, and sprayers? MachineFinder.com. Sometimes the best new addition to your fleet isn't new.
Your call is very important to us. Please hold.
Well, as John mentioned last week, his series of no-till kicked up quite the response from viewers. But he wraps up the discussion with his final chapter on no-till. John?
First, I want to have a brief word about timing. When I'm busy in the field, I try to record customer support the weekend before it shows, so viewer responses often get to me too late to be shown immediately after the respective episode. I'm 1 week late. So I'm including one final no-till segment to include some feedback. David Hunt in Blandonsville, Illinois makes a comparison. As far as chemical dependency, when conventional tillage farmers discontinue using chemicals, we can have a conversation. It is more of a change in mindset than management to be successful with no-till. David, my words were absolute chemical dependency. As proof, I know of a few organic corn and soy farmers who use no herbicides, but have never heard of a no-till organic grower. If weed resistance makes herbicides like glyphosate ineffective, it is possible to do weed control with conventional farming. I'm old enough to have done it. Others also suggested that Point and John Kepke from Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, briskly dismissed several of my points, such as the problem of heavy, wet soils. Matter of fact, I included his whole response on my script. I've met no-tillers that farm in the Champlain Valley of Vermont who have conquered their clay and claim they are able to plant 10 days sooner than their conventional neighbors. Despite the no-tillers achieving similar yields, those conventional neighbors still don't want to accept that no-till can work, and work better than the plow in heavy clay. Similarly, I've met no-tillers from Quebec with heavy clay soil that have gone completely no-till using a crop rotation and covers. They will tell you in French that the compaction in your field from tillage is a lot easier to fix than the compaction in your head. Thanks to all of you who wrote, and with great passion and detail. But as I said originally, I know of many successful no-till farmers around me, but they are growing fewer in number each year. I also believe less in anecdotes about who is making what work where, and more about data showing no-till usage is stagnant at best. I think there are valid reasons for that trend. On that note, we will move on next week.
And if you still have questions or comments for John, send him a note. That's mailbag@usfarmreport.com. Up next, in a state where some dairy farmers are fleeing, we meet a family who sustained changes and been in business for over 100 years.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by QLF. For 40 years, QLF has been proud to support American farmers that feed the world. U.S. Farm Report, brought to you by Balchem. Standing beside you for 50 years, bringing real results to the dairy industry. Now, through the Real Faces of Dairy project, you can share your story at realfacesofdairy.com.
Welcome back. Well, California continues to lead the nation in milk production, yet many dairies have a hard time staying in the state due to economics, consumer perception, and strict regulations. This week, Betsy Gibbon introduces us to one dairy with deep roots in California and how they're living out their legacy despite the challenges.
Nestled in the San Jacinto Valley sits Scott Brothers Dairy. A dairy farm more than 100 years in the making, rooted deep in Southern California.
My great-grandfather came out from Waterloo, Iowa in 1913, came on a rail car and a few Guernsey cows and a couple chickens.
From that humble beginning, Scott Brothers grew into an operation of more than 1,100 milking Holsteins on a 900-acre ranch. It's a family partnership owned by brothers Brad and Bruce with their dad Stan.
I'm 80 years old here in a couple months. So anyway, so like everybody says, why do you do it? And I said, well, that's been my life and I don't know how to slow down.
Slowing down is not in the family's blood. The dairy is one of the few remaining family-owned operations, which supplies its own creamery down the road in Chino.
I think the dairy industry is always changing. We're always trying to address what are the consumers' needs and demands.
They've built up what was a few ice cream cones from the creamery into a dairy wonderland.
Well, here we got Homo milk, Scott Brothers.
Full of fluid milk, sour cream, ice cream mix, and dozens of other products. The milk plant makes dairy products for other companies and even has a lab for research and development for new products and ideas.
They can come in here and try different flavors and see which one tastes right before they actually make it commercially.
The family is evolving its ancestors' work, but moving forward is still bringing challenges, especially in California.
It's something we take great pride in and ownership of, I guess you call it. We have to, be looking forward at the same time you're looking backwards. And as you know, many dairies in California, basically because of the regulatory environment here, and economic environment, are saying we're just basically going to leave the state and go to greener pastures.
Environmental regulations loom over dairies in the state, and the toughest critic may be the consumer.
We got to make sure as dairy farmers that we always have our best foot forward, making sure our operations are clean and look good to the consumer. A lot of things that happen here, they don't understand. So we want to make sure, one, we're giving a good visual image to them.
That's why Brad volunteers not only for industry groups, but community organizations, since after all, the dairy is part of the community.
It's amazing how many times you talk to people and they find out who you are and they go, oh, that's that DRB drive-by. Oh, that's interesting. We always want to know what goes on there.
A family valuing the basics, knowing no task is too small for its owners.
Well, I started this morning at 2 o'clock. I made one trip to Chino, hauled milk in, was back here by 6 o'clock.
A grandpa passing work ethic to his granddaughters, who could be the 5th generation of dairy farmers.
If they would decide to come back to the dairy operation, we might have to change it to Scott sisters instead of brothers. But you know what? They got a lot of time in front of them, too, to take a look at that and see what they may want to do.
Because for this family, the dairy is founded on the past, but focused on its ever-changing future. Reporting for U.S. Farm Report, I'm Betsy Gibbon.
Thanks, Betsy. Well, the Scott brothers do have an agreement with another family they bought in as a partner to manage the creamery. It's an agreement that Stan originally made with a handshake behind a milk truck in the 1970s. When we come back, Machinery Pete shows off a John Deere A in Tractor Tales.
Farm Journal On Air is the go-to app for American agriculture. Ag Day, AgriTalk, U.S. Farm Report, and more. 24/7 access to all of your favorite shows, TV and radio. In your hands, on demand. Farm Journal On Air. Download the app today.
Tractor Tales is brought to you by John Deere. Where can you find the most comprehensive inventory of John Deere certified pre-owned tractors, combines, and sprayers? MachineFinder.com. Sometimes the best new addition to your fleet isn't new.
Welcome back to Tractor Tales, folks. This week we're going to feature a classic John Deere A. This unstyled A originally from Wheaton, Kansas, but made its way to Texas. Owner Gordon McCosh enjoys showing this classic off at shows and parades.
This is a 37 Model A John Deere. It originated in Clay Center, Kansas, which is about 500 miles north of here, about 20 miles from where I grew up. My dad did business with him when I was a kid. So when I found this tractor restored in Texas, I figured I had to have it. So both the tractor and I originated in central Kansas. It's unstyled, no electricity, so it's hand crank, hand start. The fellow that restored it was Jimmy King, lived in Tulsa at the time, found it in Missouri. Well, I'm sure in central Kansas it started out as a all-purpose tractor on a wheat farm. They grow mostly wheat, milo. Back in the 30s, they raised quite a bit of cane and corn for silage. It's strictly a show tractor today. Last time out was for a Christmas parade in Terrell, Texas. And next time out will be for a tractor show in Henderson, Texas. I love it. Never had an unstyled A or unstyled John Deere before. And so I'd always thought they were real neat looking tractors and was happy to find one that was this well restored when I started looking.
Thanks so much. Well, today's Country Church Salute goes to the Big Lake Church of God located in Columbia City, Indiana. The congregation just reached a major milestone, celebrating 100 years this month. Our thanks to Gwen Ruckman for sharing their story. Stay with us. We have some harvest photos next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Kubota's full line of field-proven hay tools. Explore the full lineup at Kubota.com.
Welcome back. Well, harvest is underway in the Texas Panhandle. Look at that white blanket of cotton, Mike. This is
not snow.
yeah, exactly. Not this time of year. This is Quentin Schildknight's field. The yields are good, he says, but the quality is off a tad this year overall due to the rain that they recently had. But some farmers are seeing 2+ bales per acre on their cotton crop, Mike, and they tell me for that area, that's actually very good. Nationally, 37% of the cotton crop is harvested, 2 points ahead of average.
And the farm is really all about family, and it's moments like these during harvest that are cherished the most. Joni sent us this picture of her husband, Jesse, taking their 2 daughters, Madison and Kennedy, for a ride in the combine this fall. Had to be fun.
2 girls. I know your house is chaotic, but that is such a sweet picture.
And from all of us at U.S. Farm Report, I'm Mike Hoffman.
And I'm Tyne Morgan. Thanks for watching. Be sure to join us again next week as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report has been brought to you by Ram Commercial, America's longest-lasting heavy-duty pickups. U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.